Is Devin the Dream Haney looking a little bit nervous ahead of his bout? A very meaningful bout between him and Jose Ramirez. Ultimately, this is Jose Ramirez's, coming out party, because ultimately a lot of people think he's already on the decline. But if he's able to revive his career with this singular win over a very credible opponent in Devin Haney, that would be tremendous. But just looking at Devin Haney, looking at his face, he looks very serious. You could argue that he maybe looks nervous. He's feeling the nerves, the anticipation of the fight week, ultimately, leading up to a huge and very consequential fight where if he doesn't perform, then there's a good chance that he may question not only taking that Ryan Garcia rematch, but ultimately question, his boxing career as a whole. And that would be very disappointing to see. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we get the best version of Devin Haney and we get a great competitive fight between Jose Ramirez and Devin Haney. But if I had to break it down specifically between Haney and Ramirez, I would give the heavy edge to Devin Haney. I think the odds makers got it correct. I believe Jose Ramirez is a 7-1 underdog right now, and for good reason, because Devin Haney, even though he's coming off the loss, I feel like you can't just discredit him just because of that one performance, because ultimately it was against one of the most dangerous fighters in the sport, Ryan Garcia, and for him to take a beating like that, I think changes a fighter. I don't know if a fighter is ever the same after taking a beating like the one that Devin Haney took. I feel like if anyone's going to be able to overcome it, it is Devin, but these questions are only going to be answered within the ring. I could sit here and say, I hope Devin looks like this, I hope Devin does that, but it's up to Devin, and he's the only one that can control it. Like I said, the title of this video is whether or not Devin Haney is nervous or not, because imagine getting, basically stopped. He didn't get stopped on paper, but, to get dropped that many times, to get beaten up that many times, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to forget as well, but Devin should also remember the success that he had in that fight. If he thinks about how it was still a relatively competitive fight despite the knockdowns, I feel like Devin Haney should have the confidence to think, this dude was on PEDs, so nobody can mess with me, especially not an aging Jose Ramirez, especially one that hasn't looked good against a guy like Arnold Barboza, who, to his credit, has been, on the incline and looking to make waves in the sport of boxing and has the momentum in his career right now. Barboza isn't half the boxer that Devin Haney is. He doesn't have half the talent that Devin Haney has. So I feel like with Jose Ramirez, I'm not saying Devin's going to walk right through him, but I see a clinic. I see a masterclass performance coming from Devin Haney on Friday night, because ultimately Devin's a talented fighter. People forget because of one performance. Boxing has turned into such a sport where, the casuals are only thinking about what have you done for me lately. You're only as good as your last fight, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it's about opposition. Jose Ramirez isn't half the fighter, isn't half the talent that Ryan Garcia is, and I know that sounds disrespectful, but I'm just saying, that's more credit to Ryan Garcia, because that left hook is something that nobody in the sport of boxing has right now. That's a weapon that no one can replicate, and that's a big statement. So for Devin Haney, I feel like he's going to be able to handle whatever Jose Ramirez has in store for him, even though, I expect Jose Ramirez to try to overwhelm Devin Haney, try to smother him and get him against the ropes and make it a rugged and tough fight. I feel like Devin Haney is going to be too slick. Like I always say, Devin Haney is a rhythm fighter. He, gets into his groove, and he's a difficult fighter to time. If you can't keep up with the timing, you can't, land at will against him, you're going to have a difficult night in the office. And I think Jose Ramirez, especially taking into account the fact that he's not in his prime anymore and he hasn't, had great performances as of recent, it's going to be very difficult for him to beat a guy like Devin. He definitely has a puncher's chance, but it all basically relies on Devin. I'm thinking that we're going to get the best version of Devin that we possibly can coming off of a Ryan Garcia beatdown, and I think that that version of Devin will be more motivated, will be intelligent, and outbox Jose Ramirez to a unanimous decision. But it's all up to him. It's all up to Devin. It's all up to what what's going on in his head, because, you know, no one really knows except for Devin Haney, not even his father. So we'll find out on May 2nd what Devin Haney still has in the tank, if it's a little or if it's a lot to propel his career into, you know, further accomplishments and, you know, further success. We'll see what happens. But shout out to Devin, shout out to Jose Ramirez. They're going to put on a great show May 2nd. But thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next Navs boxing video. Peace.